woman's life hangs by a thread in the ruthless Badlands, abandoned when she needs help the most. But what happens when salvation comes from the last person anyone expected? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching summer sun beat down relentlessly on the Dakota Badlands, casting harsh shadows across the rugged terrain. Sarah Wilkins clutched her husband's arm as their wagon jostled over the uneven ground. The year was 1878, and the young couple had left their comfortable life in Boston 6 months ago, drawn west by promises of land and opportunity. "James, are you certain this is the right path?" Sarah asked, wiping perspiration from her brow with a handkerchief. Her blonde hair was coming loose from its pins, and dust had settled on her once pristine blue dress. James Wilkins, tall and lean with determined eyes, nodded firmly. "Mr. Peterson's map is quite clear, dear. The settlement should be just beyond that ridge. Another day's journey at most." The wagon creaked as it navigated around a cluster of rocks. Their 2 horses, Penny and Duke, trudged forward steadily, despite the punishing heat. "I still don't understand why we couldn't have stayed in Bismarck until autumn," Sarah muttered. "This heat is unbearable." "The land grant required immediate settlement," James reminded her. "And think of the home we'll build, Sarah. Open space as far as the eye can see. No more crowded city streets or nosy neighbors." Sarah managed to smile. James had always been a dreamer, and she'd fallen in love with his vision and determination. Still, the harsh realities of frontier life had tested her resolve daily since they'd begun their journey west. "I suppose you're right," she conceded, "though I wouldn't mind a nosy neighbor or two about now. The silence out here can be—" Her words were cut short by a sudden crack like thunder. One of the wagon wheels hit a hidden crevice, sending the vehicle lurching violently to one side. Sarah screamed as she was thrown from her seat. James desperately reached for her hand, their fingers brushing momentarily before she tumbled down the steep embankment. "Sarah!" James cried out, pulling hard on the reins. The horses whinnied in confusion as the wagon came to a precarious halt. Sarah's world became a blur of dust and pain as she rolled down the slope, rocks and thorny brush tearing at her clothes and skin. When she finally came to a stop at the bottom of the ravine, a searing pain shot through her lower back. She tried to stand but found her legs wouldn't respond. Panic surged through her as she realized she couldn't feel anything below her waist. "James!" she called out, her voice weak and trembling. "James, I can't move!" Above, James had managed to secure the wagon and was now carefully making his way down the slope. "I'm coming, Sarah, don't move." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "I couldn't if I wanted to," she whispered, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. James reached her side, his face pale with fear as he assessed her condition. "My God, Sarah," he breathed, gently touching her face. "Where are you hurt?" "My back," she whispered. "I can't feel my legs, James. I can't move them." His expression shifted from concern to horror as he realized the gravity of her injury. Out here in the wilderness, miles from any settlement or doctor, Sarah's condition was potentially fatal. James looked around desperately, as if help might materialize from the barren landscape. "I'll get you back to the wagon," he decided, though uncertainty clouded his eyes. "We'll find help. The settlement can't be far." As James carefully lifted her, Sarah bit her lip to keep from crying out. The pain in her back was excruciating, but the numbness below was even more terrifying. As they slowly made their way up the slope, Sarah's gaze drifted to the vast, empty horizon. She had never felt so small, so vulnerable as she did in that moment, cradled in her husband's trembling arms in the merciless Badlands. What neither of them noticed was the pair of dark eyes watching them from a distant ridge, eyes belonging to a figure mounted on a painted horse, observing their plight with silent interest. That evening, as James struggled to make Sarah comfortable in their damaged wagon, he knew they faced an impossible situation. The wagon was barely functional, one of the horses had gone lame, and Sarah's condition showed no signs of improvement. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her breathing shallow, her skin alarmingly hot to the touch. "We need to find help," James murmured, mostly to himself as he pressed a damp cloth to Sarah's forehead. "Tomorrow at first light, I'll ride ahead to the settlement." "Don't leave me," Sarah whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "Please, James." He took her hand and squeezed it gently. "I have to, my love. You need a doctor." The night seemed endless, filled with Sarah's pained whimpers and James's growing desperation. When dawn finally broke over the eastern horizon, painting the Badlands in hues of orange and gold, James prepared to leave. "I'll be back before nightfall," he promised, kissing Sarah's feverish brow. "Try to rest. There's water in the canteen beside you." With a heavy heart, James mounted Duke and set out toward the ridge, constantly looking back at the wagon until it was just a tiny speck in the distance. Sarah watched him go, a sense of abandonment washing over her despite knowing he had no choice. Alone in the damaged wagon, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the Badlands, she closed her eyes and prayed for survival. James pushed his horse hard, desperate to reach the settlement before midday. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its heat intensifying with each passing hour. His thoughts remained fixed on Sarah, alone and injured in the wagon. Every minute away from her felt like a betrayal, but he knew finding help was their only hope. When he finally crested the ridge around noon, his heart sank. Instead of the thriving settlement he'd expected, he found just a handful of rough structures, 3 cabins, a small corral, and what appeared to be a trading post. This wasn't the prosperous community promised in the land advertisements. It was barely an outpost. James dismounted in front of the trading post, his legs shaky from the hard ride. A weathered sign reading, "Walker's Trading Post and Supplies," hung crookedly above the door. Inside, he found a sparse room with dusty shelves holding limited merchandise. Behind a rough-hewn counter stood a gray-haired man with a skeptical squint. "Help you?" the man asked, barely looking up from the ledger he was marking. "My name is James Wilkins," James said, his voice urgent. "My wife and I were traveling to the settlement when our wagon crashed. She's badly injured, can't move her legs. We need a doctor urgently." The man, presumably Walker, finally looked up, his expression unchanging. "Ain't no doctor here, mister. Nearest one's in Bismarck. Good 4 days' ride." James felt the blood drain from his face. "But there must be someone, anyone who can help. She can't feel her legs, she might be dying." Walker shook his head slowly. "Folks round here tend to their own. Got troubles enough without taking on strangers' problems." He paused, then added with cold pragmatism, "Woman can't walk, out here that's as good as dead anyway." Rage surged through James, and he slammed his fist on the counter. "She is my wife. I won't let her die without trying everything possible." The commotion attracted the attention of 2 men who'd been sitting at a small table in the corner. They approached cautiously, one older with a silver-streaked beard, the other younger with hard eyes. "What's the trouble here?" the older man asked. James turned to them, desperation evident in his voice. "My wife is paralyzed from a wagon accident. I need help getting her to a doctor." The men exchanged looks. The younger one spoke first. "Mister, we're all just scraping by. Can't spare the time or resources for a rescue mission." "I'll pay," James said quickly. "I have money." "Ain't about money," the bearded man interrupted. "It's about survival. Winter's coming faster than you think. Everyone here is preparing, gathering supplies. We lose days helping you. We might not make it ourselves." James looked from face to face, finding only indifference or outright refusal. "Please." He tried once more. "She's all I have." Walker sighed heavily. "Best thing you can do is make her comfortable. Or," he hesitated, his voice dropping, "end her suffering quickly. Paralyzed woman won't last a week out here, let alone through winter." The suggestion hit James like a physical blow. He staggered back, bumping into a barrel of nails that clattered to the floor. "You're suggesting I kill my own wife? What kind of people are you?" "Practical ones," the younger man said bluntly. "Out here, sentiment gets you dead." James backed toward the door, disgust and despair warring within him. "I'll find help elsewhere." "There is no elsewhere," Walker called after him. "Not for 50 miles in any direction." Outside, James leaned against the trading post wall, fighting back tears of frustration. He'd promised Sarah help, and now he was returning empty-handed. Worse than empty-handed. He was returning with the knowledge that no help would come. As he prepared to mount his horse, a soft voice spoke from behind him. "I heard what happened to your wife." James turned to find a woman in her 40s, dressed in simple frontier clothing, her face weathered by sun and hardship. Martha Evans, she introduced herself. I can't help much, but I can give you some willow bark tea for her pain and clean bandages. James felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you. Anything would help. Martha disappeared into one of the cabins and returned minutes later with a small package. This won't heal her, but it might ease her suffering, she said, handing it to James. Why are you helping when others won't? James asked. Martha's eyes grew distant. Lost my daughter 2 winters ago. No one could help her either. She paused. There's talk of a Comanche healer who sometimes camps near Spirit Rock, about half a day's ride southeast of here. Most folks avoid him, don't trust Indians, but there are stories. Stories? That he knows medicine white doctors don't. That he's healed people given up for dead. She shrugged. Probably just tales, but if I were desperate enough. James felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. This Spirit Rock, you can direct me? Martha nodded and quickly gave him directions. Don't tell anyone I mentioned him, she added, and don't expect too much. Even if the stories are true, Comanches have little reason to help white folks these days. With renewed determination, James mounted his horse. Thank you, Mrs. Evans. I won't forget your kindness. As he rode away from the settlement, James's mind raced with possibilities. The prospect of seeking help from a Comanche healer would have seemed absurd just days ago, but now it represented their only chance. He pressed Duke into a gallop, knowing Sarah's life hung in the balance. Back at the wagon, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain had become a constant companion, and thirst tormented her during lucid moments. She had managed to reach the canteen once, spilling more water than she drank, but now it lay empty beside her. As afternoon faded into evening with no sign of James, fear crept into her heart. Had something happened to him? Would she die alone in this desolate place? A coyote howled in the distance, and Sarah shivered despite the lingering heat. Then, just as darkness began to fall, she heard the soft crunch of approaching footsteps. James, she called weakly, hope surging. But the figure that appeared at the wagon's edge wasn't James. In the fading light, Sarah made out the silhouette of a Native American man, his long black hair partially braided, his expression unreadable as he studied her condition. Terror seized her heart. Stories of Indian attacks had haunted her imagination since childhood. With no way to flee and no means to defend herself, Sarah could only watch as the stranger approached, his movements deliberate and silent. To her surprise, he offered a water skin, gesturing for her to drink. Desperate with thirst, Sarah cautiously accepted. The cool water was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. Thank you, she managed to say. My husband. He went for help. The man said nothing but continued to observe her with intense dark eyes. After a moment, he reached forward and gently touched her legs, pressing at different points. When Sarah showed no reaction to his touch, his expression grew grave. Can't feel, he said in accented English, touching her legs again. No, Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I can't. The man straightened and looked toward the horizon, as if making a decision. Then he turned back to Sarah and spoke a single word. Wait. With that, he disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Sarah to wonder if she had hallucinated the entire encounter. But the water skin beside her proved it had been real, and somehow, despite everything, Sarah felt a strange new emotion taking root alongside her fear and pain. Hope. James pushed his exhausted horse through the darkness, guided only by moonlight and Martha Evans's directions. Spirit Rock, supposedly a formation that resembled a human face in profile, should be visible soon if he was on the right path. His thoughts constantly returned to Sarah, alone and suffering. The guilt of leaving her was almost unbearable, yet the alternative, returning without help, was worse. When he finally spotted the distinctive rock formation silhouetted against the night sky, relief washed over him. Following Martha's instructions, he searched the surrounding area for any sign of a camp. After nearly an hour of increasingly desperate searching, James spotted the faint glow of a fire in a sheltered ravine. Approaching cautiously, James dismounted and led his horse toward the light. He hadn't fully considered the danger of seeking out a Comanche alone at night. Tribes that had once controlled vast territories had been driven to increasingly desperate circumstances by white expansion. Many had good reason to hate settlers like him. As James neared the camp, a sharp voice called out in Comanche. He froze, raising his hands to show they were empty. "I'm looking for help," he called out. "My wife is injured. I was told there's a healer here." A figure emerged from the shadows, rifle aimed steadily at James's chest. It was a young Comanche warrior, no more than 20, with sharp, suspicious eyes. "White man brings trouble," the young warrior said in broken English. "Go away." "Please," James pleaded. "My wife can't move her legs. She'll die without help." "Not our problem," the young man replied coldly. "White people bring disease, take land, kill buffalo. Now want help?" Before James could respond, another voice spoke from behind the warrior, this one older and carrying authority. An exchange in Comanche followed, with the younger man protesting vigorously before reluctantly lowering his weapon. An older man stepped into the firelight, tall and straight-backed despite his years, with gray streaks in his long black hair. He wore a mixture of traditional Comanche clothing and items clearly obtained through trade with whites. "I am Tawakoni Jim," he said in remarkably clear English. "They call me a healer, though my people simply say I know the old ways. Why should I help your wife?" The directness of the question caught James off guard. Because she's suffering. Because she's innocent." Tawakoni Jim's expression remained impassive. "Many innocent suffer. My people suffer daily. Why is your wife's suffering more important?" James struggled to find words. "It's not more important. I love her. I would do anything to save her." "Anything?" The healer raised an eyebrow. "Would you give your own life for hers?" "Yes," James answered without hesitation. "Would you give your land, your possessions?" "All of it." The healer studied him intently, as if searching for deception. "White men have promised many things to my people. Those promises turned to dust. I'm not promising as a white man," James said desperately. "I'm promising as a husband who loves his wife." Tawakoni Jim was silent for a long moment. Finally he spoke. "I will come see your wife. I promise nothing more." Relief flooded through James. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The healer turned and spoke to the younger warrior, who clearly objected to whatever was being said. After a heated exchange, the young man stormed off into the darkness. "Nakota disagrees with helping whites," Tawakoni Jim explained. "His father was killed by bluecoats last year." "I'm sorry," James said genuinely. "Words mean little. Actions tell a man's heart." The healer began gathering various pouches and bundles into a leather bag. "Where is your wife?" James described the location of their wagon, and Tawakoni Jim nodded. "I know this place. We will leave at first light." "But my wife—" "Night travel in Badlands is dangerous," the healer interrupted firmly. "We leave at dawn. Rest now. Your wife needs you strong." Though every instinct urged him to return immediately to Sarah, James recognized the wisdom in the healer's words. He accepted the offered place by the fire and a strip of dried meat, his mind racing with worry and hope. At first light they set out, James, Tawakoni Jim, and the reluctant Nakota, who had returned during the night and insisted on accompanying them, clearly unwilling to let the older man travel alone with a white stranger. As they rode, James attempted conversation with the healer. "How did you learn to speak English so well?" "I lived among whites for 7 years, Tawakoni Jim replied. "At school run by missionaries. They thought they could make me white inside." A faint smile crossed his face. "They failed. But you learned their medicine?" The healer shook his head. "I learned some of their ways, but my healing comes from my people's knowledge. Plants, animals, the earth. They speak if you know how to listen." "And can you heal paralysis?" James asked, voicing the question that terrified him most. "Sometimes the body can heal itself if given proper help," Tawakoni Jim answered carefully. "Sometimes the damage is beyond repair. I will not know until I see her." They rode in silence after that, pushing their horses as fast as the difficult terrain would allow. By mid-morning, James recognized landmarks indicating they were nearing the wagon. His heart raced with both anticipation and fear. Would Sarah still be alive? Would the healer truly be able to help her? As they approached the final ridge, Nakota suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "Someone is there," he said quietly, pointing toward the wagon. James strained his eyes and made out a figure moving around the wagon. "Who would—" he began, then spurred his horse forward in alarm. "Wait!" Tawakoni Jim called after him, but James was already racing down the slope. As he drew closer, James realized with shock that the figure was Tawakoni Jim, or at least someone dressed very similarly. He pulled his horse to a confused halt as the man by the wagon straightened and turned to face him. Though clearly Comanche and bearing a strong resemblance to Tawakoni Jim, this man was younger, his face bearing different scars and his hair adorned with distinctive eagle feathers. "Who are you?" James demanded. "What are you doing with my wife?" The man regarded him calmly. "I am Ekapita, brother of Tawakoni Jim. I found your woman alone, suffering." "James," Sarah's voice called weakly from inside the wagon. "It's all right. He's been helping me." Tawakoni Jim and Nakota arrived behind James, leading to an extraordinary moment as the two brothers faced each other. They spoke rapidly in Comanche, with expressions shifting from surprise to what appeared to be disagreement. James dismounted and rushed to Sarah's side. Her face was pale and drawn with pain, but her eyes were clearer than when he'd left her. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No," Sarah assured him, grasping his hand weakly. "He brought fresh water, made some kind of tea for the pain. It helped." She looked past James to where the two brothers continued their discussion. "Who is the older one?" "The healer I went to find," James explained, still trying to understand the situation. "Tawakoni Jim. Apparently the man who helped you is his brother." Outside, the brothers' conversation had grown more heated. Nakota watched them warily, his hand never far from his knife. Finally, Tawakoni Jim approached the wagon, his expression grave. "My brother says your wife's spine is damaged," he said directly to James. "The paralysis may be permanent." James felt as if the ground had fallen away beneath him. "But you can help her, can't you?" "There must be something. There are treatments that might help," Tawakoni Jim continued. "But they require time. Many days, perhaps weeks." "Weeks," James repeated, his voice hollow. "She cannot be moved far. Treatment must be given consistently." The healer paused, then added, "My brother and I disagree on whether to help you." Ekapita spoke up, his English less practiced than his brother's. "Woman will die without help, innocent of white man's crimes against our people. All whites benefit from our suffering." Nakota interjected bitterly. "Enough," Tawakoni Jim said firmly. Turning back to James, he continued, "We have a camp 2 hours from here near water. Better place for healing than this open ground. If you wish our help, we will take her there." "Yes," James said immediately. "Please. There is price," Ekapita said. "Not money. Promise." "What promise?" James asked. Tawakoni Jim answered, "If we heal your wife, you will tell truth about our people. That we are not savages, that we helped when your own kind refused." James nodded solemnly. "I swear it." The brothers exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Tawakoni Jim nodded. "We will help." As the men prepared to transport Sarah, Nakota pulled his horse aside, clearly unhappy with the decision. James approached him cautiously. "Thank you for your help, even though you didn't want to give it," he said. Nakota regarded him coldly. "I do not help for you. I help for Tawakoni Jim, who is like father to me." He paused, then added with surprising vulnerability, "White man's medicine killed my mother with whiskey, killed my father with bullets. Why should I believe your promises?" The raw pain in the young warrior's voice struck James deeply. "I can't change what others have done," he said quietly. "I can only be responsible for my own actions." Nakota studied him for a long moment. "We will see what kind of man you truly are," he said finally, before turning his horse to help with the preparations. As they carefully transferred Sarah to a travois constructed by the brothers, James watched the 3 Comanche men work with efficient, practiced movements. His entire understanding of the world had shifted in the past 2 days. The people he'd been taught to fear were now his wife's only hope for survival, while those of his own kind had turned their backs. Sarah squeezed his hand weakly as they prepared to depart. "Do you trust them?" she whispered. James looked at the brothers who were securing the travois to one of their horses with gentle care to minimize jostling. "Yes," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I believe I do." The Comanche camp was nestled in a protected valley that seemed impossibly lush compared to the surrounding Badlands. A small spring fed a clear pool, around which several teepees were arranged in a semicircle. Women paused in their work to watch the strange procession arrive. Two white settlers, accompanied by Tawakoni Jim, Ekapita, and the visibly displeased Nakota. James held his breath as they entered the camp, acutely aware that they were entirely at the mercy of people whom settlers typically regarded with fear and suspicion. Sarah lay still on the travois, drifting in and out of consciousness, the pain of the journey evident in the tight lines around her mouth. An elderly woman approached, her face a map of deep wrinkles, her eyes sharp with wisdom. She spoke rapidly to Tawakoni Jim, gesturing toward Sarah with obvious concern. "This is my mother, Queen-Eye," Tawakoni Jim explained. "She says your wife should be brought to her teepee. It is coolest there by the water." James nodded gratefully. "Thank you. Please thank her for me." With gentle efficiency, Sarah was transferred from the travois to a bed of soft furs inside the largest teepee. James marveled at the interior, clean, organized, and surprisingly spacious. Various plants hung drying from the support poles, and the air carried a pleasant mixture of herbal scents. Queen-Eye examined Sarah thoroughly, her gnarled hands moving with surprising gentleness over the injured areas. She spoke to Tawakoni Jim, who translated. "My mother says your wife's back is broken here." He indicated a spot on Sarah's lower spine. "The swelling presses on the paths that carry feeling to her legs. If swelling can be reduced, some feeling might return." "And if it doesn't?" James asked, fearing the answer. Tawakoni Jim met his gaze directly. "Then she will never walk again, but she can still live." In the days that followed, James witnessed a level of medical care he'd never imagined possible outside a city hospital, perhaps even surpassing it in some ways. Poultices of strange-smelling herbs were applied to Sarah's back. She was given teas that helped manage her pain without the stupefying effects of laudanum. Queen-Eye performed a form of massage on Sarah's legs daily, explaining through Tawakoni Jim that it would prevent the muscles from wasting away even if they couldn't be used. Most surprisingly, they constructed a frame above Sarah's bed from which she could pull herself up regularly, keeping her upper body strong. White doctors, Tawakoni Jim explained, often let such patients lie still until they waste away. Movement is life. Sarah's spirits improved dramatically under their care. Though she remained paralyzed, the constant pain diminished, and with it, her fear. She began to learn words in Comanche, much to Queen-Eye's delight. The old woman spent hours teaching Sarah about the medicinal plants that hung in the teepee, explaining their uses through gestures and the few English words she knew. James found himself assigned tasks around the camp, not charity, but exchange for the care his wife received. He helped repair teepees, learned to hunt small game in the Comanche way, and assisted with preparing food. Though some members of the band remained distant, others gradually accepted his presence. Nakota remained aloof, watching James with suspicion. One evening, as James struggled to start a fire using the friction method Ekapita had shown him, Nakota approached. "You do it wrong," he said bluntly, crouching beside James. "Watch." He demonstrated the proper technique, his movements precise and practiced. After several attempts, James managed to produce a spark. "Thank you," James said, surprised by the young warrior's assistance. Nakota shrugged. "You work hard. Not lazy like most whites." It wasn't exactly warm approval, but James recognized it as progress. As weeks passed, an unexpected development occurred. Sarah began to report occasional tingling sensations in her toes. At first, Tawakoni Jim cautioned against too much hope, but when she managed to slightly wiggle the toes on her left foot, even he allowed a rare smile to cross his face. "The swelling lessens," he explained. "The path begins to clear." Queen-Eye intensified her treatments, focusing particularly on the areas where sensation was returning. Progress was agonizingly slow. A slight movement here, a faint sensation there, but it was undeniably progress. 1 month after their arrival at the camp, Sarah managed to move her left leg slightly at the knee. The achievement brought tears to her eyes, and James enveloped her in a careful embrace. "I never thought I'd be so happy about moving a leg an inch," she whispered, laughing through her tears. James held her close, overcome with gratitude. "These people, they've given you back to me. They've given me back to myself," Sarah corrected gently. That evening, as James sat with Tawakoni Jim outside his teepee, the healer spoke reflectively. Your wife has strong spirit. She fights hard. She always has. James agreed. Even back east, she never accepted limitations others tried to place on her. Tawakoni Jim nodded. This is why she heals. Body follows spirit's lead. I don't know how we can ever repay you, James said, emotion thickening his voice. Remember your promise, the healer replied. Tell truth about us. I will, James vowed. But that seems so little compared to what you've done. Tawakoni Jim was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. There is something more you could do. Your wife learns our medicine ways quickly. Queen Eye says she has the touch. If you stayed through winter, Sarah could learn more. Then when you return to your people, she could be healer for both worlds. James stared at him in surprise. You would teach her your sacred knowledge? After everything whites have taken from you? Knowledge is not like land or buffalo, Tawakoni Jim said. Sharing it takes nothing from us. And perhaps if whites and Comanche share some ways, there will be less hatred. The proposal was unexpected but oddly fitting. James knew that returning to white society with Sarah still partially disabled would be challenging. If she had healing skills to offer, she would have purpose beyond being seen as merely an invalid. I would need to discuss it with Sarah, James said, but I think she would be honored. The following morning, as dawn painted the eastern sky, James found Nakota preparing his horse for a hunting expedition. Gathering his courage, James approached him. May I join you? He asked. I'd like to learn more about hunting in this territory. Nakota regarded him with surprise, then suspicious assessment. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Keep up or return alone. It was a challenging day. Nakota set a grueling pace, testing James's endurance and skill. By midday, they had tracked and killed a deer using Comanche hunting methods that emphasized stealth and precision, rather than the brute force approach James had been taught. As they prepared the meat for transport back to camp, Nakota finally spoke more than terse instructions. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? James asked. A weak man. Arrogant. Nakota focused on his work as he spoke. White men I have known take what they want and give nothing back. I was raised to believe all Indians were savages, James admitted. Now I see that view was the true savagery. Nakota looked up sharply. Pretty words. Not just words, James insisted. I've lived among your people for weeks now. I've seen more honor, more community, more wisdom here than in many white towns. Yet your people still take our land, kill our buffalo, break treaties. James couldn't deny it. Yes, and I can't change what others do. But I can change myself, and perhaps influence those around me. Nakota studied him for a long moment. Tawakoni Jim says your wife might stay to learn healing ways. We're considering it, James confirmed. If you stay through winter, Nakota said slowly, I will teach you to track and hunt properly. You are clumsy as a buffalo calf now. James recognized the offer for the significant gesture it was. I would be grateful for your teaching. When they returned to camp, James found Sarah sitting upright outside Queen Eye's teepee, her back supported by cushions. Her face glowed with excitement. James, look! With immense effort, she managed to move both legs slightly, the movement small but deliberate. James knelt beside her, joy overwhelming him. That's wonderful. Tawakoni Jim says I might eventually walk with crutches, she said, hope brightening her voice. It will take many months of work, but it's possible. James took her hands in his. Sarah, he's offered to let us stay through winter, so you can learn more of their healing ways. Her eyes widened. Truly? Queen Eye mentioned something similar, but I thought perhaps I misunderstood. Would you want to? James asked. It would mean a very different life than we planned. Sarah looked around at the camp, at Queen Eye, who watched them with knowing eyes, at Ekapita showing children how to make small bows, at Tawakoni Jim carefully preparing medicines. I think, she said slowly, that this is exactly the life we were meant to find. 3 days later, under a clear autumn sky, a small ceremony was held. James and Sarah were formally invited to stay with the band through winter. Tawakoni Jim presented them with gifts, a beautifully crafted medicine pouch for Sarah, a hunting knife for James. To everyone's surprise, Nakota stepped forward with his own offering,